Good day to you. Did you ever see something that was from a different culture and just think to yourself, that's really, really weird? For example, when you go to Britain for the first time, one of the first things that stands out to you is how the buses come around and they have two levels to them. And there's a second level up top with a staircase. And at first, it looks kind of neat, but it's also kind of weird. And it all has to do with the way that you're perceiving what you're seeing. It has to do with the buses that you have back in your own country. So you say to yourself, gee, I never really thought about an upper deck to a bus that you can walk up through a spiral staircase. How do you pay the conductor? It just seems strange. It's about perception. And that's what this chapter is all about. It's about perception plus intercultural communication competence. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's instructor video lecture. Let's start off with the idea that it's actually a prerequisite to communicating to be able to receive and perceive information. It's a prerequisite. You have to take in stimuli. And that's a whole involved process that this book goes into much detail about, as well as many communication classes when you study this field, is what exactly happens when we take a sight in through our eyes, like this fan that you're seeing behind me. Did you see it until I mentioned it? Or did I have to mention it for you to see the fan moving and you're trying to figure out, well, is it keeping things cool down there? Or does it have a light bulb that goes with it? I mean, I don't know where your mind is going, but perceiving involves a lot of different phases that this book talks about. So we're going to touch on some of them here. Let's first talk about the idea of sensing, because that's the first step to perception, is sensing. Sensing is a very physical or physiological, or if you prefer, neurological process. It happens to you physically. It's like if I stop talking, can you hear the air conditioning? Maybe not. It might be too quiet. But think of it this way. If you're sitting in a classroom and suddenly somebody says to you, hey, there's a lawnmower that's going outside, but you hadn't heard the lawnmower and now you do, you are sensing that. It's coming in through your ears. You're sensing things through your eyes all the time as well. As you look around, you're seeing colors and objects and things that are moving. It's neurological. It goes directly into the brain. We're not talking about what happens next. We're just talking about sensing things like, when you say to yourself, I just sense that something good is going to happen in my life. It's a kind of a gut level feeling, but it's neurologically based. That means it goes to our nerves, into our eyes, and into our brain. That's the first part of perceiving. And Fred Yant takes the opportunity when talking about sensing to talk about the differences between two very different worlds, one led by Aristotle in ancient Greece. Hopefully you studied Aristotle, or you will at some point in a communication class. We certainly will in this class. Aristotle talked very much about how you can persuade people, and that's how you can change the way that they sense things and ultimately perceive things. For example, if somebody doesn't want to eat until 5 o'clock, but you've made a nice meal at 3 o'clock and you want them to join you for that meal, you might go over to their house and you say, come on, if you eat at 5, you're going to have to wait another 2 hours. And it's going to be later in the evening. If you eat right now, I've got this great cooked meal. And if they end up saying, okay, you've persuaded them. You've persuaded them, which has affected their sensation. They have sensed that you've come over to talk to them about something. And then you've affected the way that they have perceived what you wanted to talk about by your persuasion. Now, that is very different, Fred Yant compares, very different to Confucius, who Fred Yant compares, Confucius, the philosopher from China. And he was talking very much about harmony as a way of affecting sensing. And this is a little bit difficult for us Westerners to understand. You don't really see it until you go to China. But China is the oldest continuous culture in the world. We know that. And when you go to China, you see many people in public parks doing what is known as Tai Chi, which is, I don't pretend to be an expert in it, but I do know enough to know that it is a kind of, I wouldn't call it a martial art, but it's a way of positioning the body and doing movements to make it in harmony with the world. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts out there to the world. The globe is spinning around. There's air currents. There's seasons. There's a lot of rhythm to our world. And you can see that in Confucianism, who believe that we should be in harmony. When we're out of harmony, we're not sleeping well, we're drinking too much, we're taking pills to get rid of pains, we're doing things that are trying to compensate for basically being out of harmony. If you're not sleeping well, like a lot of students don't, when it comes to finals time, Confucius would say your harmony is out, and that affects the way that you sense things. Now we're going to go on to how culture affects sensing. And in particular, there's a concept that's called field dependence. And basically what field dependence refers to when we're talking about culture affecting sensing is that the background that surrounds you is very, very important. For example, if you were to go to a children's birthday party, let's say a 12-year-old children's birthday party, and then a person who came to perform was performing by putting butane fuel in his mouth and then lighting it on fire and blowing it out. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I have in plenty of cities. You would say to yourself, that's very strange given this background. It's very strange to see these children having to witness a person putting lighter fluid and then burning it. But maybe it was because this person is demonstrating the depths of what a human being will go to earn money. And that's the way that the child is going to maybe eventually arrive at understanding this kind of really strange event later on in life. The point is that the background of the children's birthday party affects the way that you sense what happens. It is a field dependence. If you had just seen this person on the street corner as you're driving a car, you may not think as much about it. You may, but you may not because there's a different background that's going on. Now let's move on to perceiving. Perceiving is the next thing that's talked about, and there are 3 phases that go on. Perceiving is after sensing, and when you get to perceiving, there are also 3 phases within perceiving that happen. One of them is called selection, a second one is called organization, and a third one is called interpretation. So when you get to the selection part of perceiving, there are things around you all the time, as I have already pointed out. As you're reading this textbook, you're sort of deciding which pages am I really paying attention to and which ones am I reading while I'm also texting my friend. And am I even looking beyond the book while I'm reading and seeing what's happening outside? Are you even aware of what the weather is like outside? That's what selection is all about, that you make a conscious selection. Oh, I'm going to look over here right now. I'm selecting. I'm choosing to do that. That's phase 1 of perceiving. Phase 2 is organization. We look at something and then we organize it. And a lot of times we organize things into stereotypes when we are looking at people. If you go shopping and you see somebody with a basket of groceries and you see them drinking a lot of diet soda, for example, you might place that into the category of a person who believes that they have a weight problem and they're trying to lose weight. That's the way that you're organizing this perception, this selection of what you've seen in the grocery store. You're organizing it into a kind of a stereotype that you have as an example. It's a second phase. And then there's a third phase of interpretation. The interpretation phase is where we assign meaning to the event that we just saw. So if we take the soda again, the diet soda, and we say the meaning behind that is that this person is struggling with their weight. It's not just that they're trying to lose weight, they're struggling. But they're also struggling with having to drink soda. I mean, they love soda so much that they can't give it up, so they have to go to diet soda. That's interpretation. Fred Yant gives some really great examples of different countries and the way that perceiving is different. For example, in China, a lot of China is talked about in the book. There's a lot of examples of how food has a big impact on the way that Chinese people select, organize, and interpret things. And in particular, Confucianism calls for a balance even in the foods that you eat. So we may think of it as the food groups that we have in the States. I forget what they are. It's a pyramid now. When I was a kid, it was 4 food groups: grains, vegetables, I forget the rest. But in China, they also have a similar idea when they put a plate on the table in front of you. And speaking of China, you know about the yin and the yang. That's that circle, and then inside of it, it has 2 curved looking forms that make the circle together perfect. One black, one is white. The yin is said to be that very, very dark part of human existence and the dark part of the world. Not dark in terms of being evil, but dark in terms of being the hidden side of life, in terms of being those things that we haven't explored yet. That's one way of thinking of the yin. Whereas the yang the Y-A-N-G is the bright side of life. It's the flowers, it's the daylight, it's the ideas that spark into our heads. It's a little bit tough to understand if you haven't grown up in that kind of culture, but it's important to mention here as an example as we really try to understand different cultures, even though we're not going to get to visit all of them. And then there's the idea of a high and a low context culture and how that affects perceiving as well. A high context culture is one in which the context is so clear that not a lot of direct communication has to take place. You just know what is going to happen. It's like if you take a date to a movie, if you have a relationship with that person and you've had it for a long time, and suddenly the movie ends, and you tend to know whether one likes to stick around to see the credits, or whether one person likes to wait around till the lights come on, but you don't say anything. You just sort of sit there and then you stand up at the same time and then you walk out of the movie theater. That's a very, very, very high context culture because you have a relationship and it's defined for you how you guys like to view movies together, or at least one is patient with the other's desire of when to leave. A low context culture is a culture without a lot of context to it, so the communication needs to be more direct. It would be as if you were to walk into a brand new country that you've never been to that is so different from anything that you've done, and you're just kind of amazed, like, how do I get onto how do I get a taxi? How do I take a bus? How do I ask somebody where a bathroom is? How do I change money? How do I order a food that's in a different language and I'm not even sure what the food is? That's a very, very low context culture, so you have to be direct. When you're direct, you're asking questions. ¿Dónde está el baño? In Espanol is where is the bathroom? I have to say that. Whereas in a high context culture, I could just walk into a restaurant and the restaurant guy knows by my look on my face, I want the bathroom, and he's like, and I walk over there. I hope you understand that and you can dig into a little bit more on your own in the chapter. Now we're going to go on to intercultural communication context as a way of affecting perception. And really what intercultural communication context is all about is these two words called encoding and decoding. All right, I'm throwing a lot of words at you here, so just if you have to focus on one thing, focus on this sentence. Intercultural communication context via encoding, putting ideas into symbols, and decoding, interpreting those symbols, is basically all about this sentence: the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in a different culture. Okay, so if you come down here to Mexico and you go to a bank, you may end up waiting 15 minutes even though you're the second person in line because people move slower. People they have more time. They're not rushing around as much. If you get up to that bank teller and you start to get mad and you start to raise your voice, you know what's going to happen? The Mexican person is going to walk away probably because they don't deal in that kind of anger. So that would be inappropriate communication, even though in our country, we would feel that we have a right as a customer in a customer service environment to complain about service that we're receiving if we're not receiving the service that we want. The ability to communicate effectively and appropriately is due to a bunch of things. The book covers it, things like your personality, things like the communication skills you have, whether you're willing to psychologically adjust to things. You know, I've seen people go to Britain and they don't like the beer because they're used to a cold lager, Yingling lager, and suddenly they're drinking an ale that is served at 58 degrees temperature, and it takes them a while, but they adjust if they like it. After a while, they say, I'm not used to drinking this. It's an acquired taste. I've made a psychological adjustment. Next, the book chapter goes on to multiple identities, how people have multiple identities and that we need to get used to that if we want to have this kind of competence that this chapter is trying to teach us. So if you have a respect for people and you see a person in a situation where he's a father in another country or in the United States, and so when he's a father, he's around his kids and he's saying, I want you off the computer, or I need you to do some yard work today, or I think you did a great job playing in the baseball game. But then you see that same person out partying with friends, and that person is out drinking beers and talking loudly and swearing and calling a bad play that they saw on a TV screen with the baseball game. multiple identities among that person and also other people having multiple identities, to be able to appreciate that and not see it as a threat, not see it as something that's you see as lower than yourself. That's what it's all about. Fred Yant calls it having rhetorical sensitivity. If you've read deeply in the book, you know that that's about being sensitive to others' needs. It's about trying not to offend them. It means about trying to serve them what it is that they're looking for, emotional needs, or if they want information. It's basically trying to communicate in a dignified way. You can read some more about that. The book also talks about a third culture idea as a way of perceiving culture. A third culture is kind of like a marriage between two people who come from two different backgrounds. Like in Pennsylvania, we have a ton of families that are both Irish and Italian. So the father was Irish, the mother Italian, or vice versa. They came together, and now you have a third culture. And this third culture may, for example, really celebrate St. Patrick's Day with what is the meal on St. Patty's Day? I'm not Irish. I think it's corned beef. Yeah, corned beef. And that same family, though, may also have a lot of pasta in their daily dinners because of the Italian side. It's a third culture coming together. And while we're speaking about cultures, we have just two more concepts to get across in today's video lecture. The next one is multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is a term you hear a lot in universities. When you get outside of universities, a lot of people tend to sort of badmouth it in the American media. But really, it's all about the ideal of respects and tolerances for other people, no matter what their differences are. If you go to Amsterdam, it's one of the most tolerant cities, if not the most tolerant cities in the world, and I consider it a great experiment in civilization. If you're a heroin addict and you're living in Amsterdam, they have a place for you to go where they want you to stay there and do what you're going to do, but keep it away from the rest of society. So go do your heroin, we'll give you clean needles, and you just stay here on these barges. Amsterdam also has a red light district where prostitution is legal and women are unionized and they're checked for hygiene. Amsterdam also, of course, as many of you know, have coffee houses where you can smoke marijuana legally. Amsterdam also has a really developed transportation system with tram cars, bicycle paths, and all these other things going on. If you want to talk about multiculturalism and respecting other people, no matter how different they are, go to Amsterdam and you'll get a real lesson in learning that there are many different kinds of people. And the idea here is not to develop the kind of hatred that the Boston bombers did. That's what I like about this book being so updated. It's talking even about the Boston bombers and how we know one of them was just convicted. That was built up on a hatred, we think, a hatred by them against America. They were of Chechnyan heritage from Russia, and they had a hatred of America, and that's the way that they wanted to exact their anger. It's the opposite of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is being able to come to Mexico like I am and know that people are going to be slow. I've been waiting on a guy that's supposed to be coming to put in a sink upstairs. I'm going to do the rest of the plumbing myself, but he's making the cabinet. He was supposed to be here on Friday. No. Supposed to be here this morning. Not here. He's supposed to be here in a few minutes. I don't know. I'm waiting around. Kind of like the cable guy in Pennsylvania, right? But I'm not going to be mad about it because I'm going to take a multicultural approach. And now that finally finishes us with ethics. Ethics differs between Western and Eastern civilizations generally. When we use Western, by the way, we're talking about Western Europe, we're talking about the Britain, France, we're talking about the US, we're talking about Mexico, we're talking about South America, versus Eastern, now we're talking about China, Japan. We can even put a little bit of Australia in there. The world doesn't divide up neatly, but we can say that Eastern and Western philosophies are different to this extent. Western ethics grant more rights to the individual. Like in the United States, we can post a sign, no trespassing, right? We do that all the time. Private property. That's a right that's extended to the individual. If you go to China, you have a very different feeling. You never see people talking about themselves by saying, oh, I'm earning my degree in mathematics, and then I'm going to try and get a job for a computer firm, and then I'm going to move to another side of the country. People don't talk like that unless you really pull it out of them. They talk about we more often because in Eastern cultures, the ethics are more towards what benefits everybody. And that's why at 9:30 every morning, I would hear loudspeakers outside of my bedroom in China with an exercise lady. This would be a lady that is calling out exercises to do sit-ups, to do push-ups, to stay healthy. It's an ethic that is designed for everybody. There's no cost to it. It's government provided, as opposed to an ethic that's focused on the right of the individual. Okay, so that is going to wrap up our second instructor video lecture on perception and international communication competence. Good day.